So my name is Scott Crowder. I'm going to, in 20 minutes, give you probably a bit of a fire hose on quantum computing, a little bit of context, where we are today, and where we need to go to make quantum computing useful more broadly for society. Okay, so my focus is in getting people to use quantum computing. That's what I do as a daily job. Quantum computing is very, very easy to overhype. There's a lot of hype out there. It sounds like science fiction come to life. It's got teleportation. It's got Einstein never believed it, spooky action at a distance, flux capacitors, the whole 9 yards, right? But it is real. Quantum computers are now real. Quantum computers are now large enough and powerful enough that you can run programs on a quantum computer that you cannot run on the world's largest supercomputers that exist and will never be able to run on a classical computer. But that doesn't make them useful for society yet. So how do we get from where we are today to that point? And that's what I want to talk about. But first, a little bit of context here. So we think quantum computing will be the second major quantum revolution in history. It's been 100 years now since people discovered that quantum mechanics is a good representation of how the universe really works. And we think the first major insight that came out of that was that nature is discrete or quantized, and our better understanding of that led to the development of lasers, led to transistors, led to things that really transformed society over the last 100 years. Tens of trillions of dollars in economic impact. We can't really imagine our lives without the technology that underpins this. We think quantum computing is going to have a similar impact, but from a different insight. And that is that the math behind quantum mechanics, the math of nature, is different than the math that we use for classical computation, which is binary arithmetic. And we kind of think of computers as they just get big enough, can solve any problem. That's fundamentally not true. With binary arithmetic, there is limitations to what it can compute and how it can compute it. If we use quantum mechanics as the basis of computation, it allows us to approach the math in a different way, and it allows us to solve different problems that cannot be approached using binary computers. So what kind of problems are we talking about? Well, the first one, which is like easy to get your head around, is a little bit hand-wavy as the reason why, but it's using quantum mechanics to simulate quantum mechanics. So basically modeling molecules, atoms, quarks, electrons, et cetera, the natural world with better accuracy than what you can do today. So lots of different applications. Some of them came up earlier this morning, developing better batteries for better storage, for better car batteries, et cetera, developing better materials, solving the corrosion problem, which is a huge problem in defense and transportation, understanding the chemistry of biology better so you can do better drug discovery, et cetera, and materials for high-tech industries like designing better photoresists for semiconductor processing and things like that. The second kind of math is really the same kind of math, but it's used for different problem sets. And this is really solving algebra in exponential spaces. And that's harder to get your head around what that means, but there's three basic other problem areas that people have proven on a blackboard quantum computing will be better at. So one of them is finding patterns in structured problems that look random. It looks like noise to a classical algorithm, but quantum algorithms can pull out. The most famous one here is Shor's algorithm, which was kind of the topic of the breakfast conversation, which is that Shor came up with an algorithm in the mid-90s on the blackboard that said if I had a big quantum computer, I could do factoring much more efficiently. Much more efficiently meaning something that would take the life of the universe to do on the world's largest classical computer, I could do in the matter of hours, days on a quantum computer. So basically, all of asymmetric cryptography is toast when you get large enough quantum computers. Underlying that, like the math behind it, is this solving algebra in exponential spaces, and his insight that he could turn that factoring problem into a period finding problem and find the pattern in the data using a quantum algorithm. So that same kind of math underlies a lot of multivariate optimization type of problems. So things that blow up on you quick, things that have like tens or hundreds of variables, but because of the interactions between those variables, it gets into an exponential space. They're very hard to solve. Classical algorithms don't do a great job of it. All right, two other areas. One of them is machine learning. Machine learning falls pretty much directly into this hidden patterns and structure problems kind of mindset. Doing a better job of classification, finding structure in that data using a quantum algorithm. And the last one, which may not be intuitive, is solving partial differential equations. Part of that flow, you can use quantum algorithms that do the same underlying math. Okay, so that's the why. The why for quantum computing is if we could solve all these problems, there would be very large societal impact because you could do better optimization, last conversation we just had, logistics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. All right, so what do we need to do to bring useful quantum computing to the world? Overly simplistically, we need to do two things. Somebody needs to build the hardware and software stack to build more and more powerful quantum computers. All right, that's kind of like what we see as our job. And the second, which is we see as our job plus the ecosystem job, is somebody needs to come up with the algorithmic approaches and understand how to map real-world problems and applications to that and do the research around improving the algorithms, improving the application research. And this is reason why we spend so much of our time building communities, because that's equally important. I mean, it's not any different than AI. Like, you know, the AI, winning in AI is a combination of having access to leading hardware and software stacks, but also the algorithmic work and the application. Right? Same thing. All right, where are we in quantum? Cut through all the hype, where are we in quantum computing? All right, I just said we now have quantum computers, a couple of us in the world, have quantum computers that you can run a quantum program. You take that same quantum program, it will not run on the world's largest classical computer. You could buy everything that Jensen sells, you still wouldn't be enough to run that quantum program. That does not mean that running that quantum program gives you an output that is better than a different classical approach on a classical computer. It's a subtlety, and that's why it gets like mixed up, but that's where we are. We're in this weird intermediate stage now where we have built quantum computers that can run a quantum algorithm that you can't run on a classical computer, but we haven't yet proven that that quantum algorithm gives you an outcome that's better than any known classical method. That's really hard to prove, but that's the next step. We think we're going to get there either this year or next year. You're starting to see people come out with plausible claims of doing this. But it's going to take time because any known classical method depends on who's in the room. Like any known to you is different than any known to like all of humanity, right? So these claims are going to take time to be proven out. It's not any different than any heuristic algorithm that's out there for classical models. You know, you run it, you find it's better, you think it's better, you test other things. All right, so that's near term. The second stage is how do you build bigger and bigger quantum computers that can run longer and longer programs and solve more and more complex quantum algorithms? That's why you need a credible path to large-scale fault-tolerant quantum computers that can run billions of instructions instead of where we are today, which is running tens of thousands of instructions. Right? So the tens of thousands of instructions are still too big to run on a classical supercomputer, but they might not be big enough to run the quantum algorithm you want to run. Definitely not large enough to run like Shor's algorithm, et cetera, right? Which is why most likely your asymmetric cryptography is safe today. Another way to look at this, and I'm not going to go through the details because I promised this would be a fire hose and I will keep my promise, is to look at this from the perspective of you've got these blackboard proofs that are out there that people have proven on a blackboard, QED, that this algorithmic approach is better than any known classical approach. Those are all the dots on that curve. In spin model, optimization, chemistry, materials, cryptography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The little red dot that says 2025 is where IBM's technology is today. It's in the white space. You can't run it on a classical computer, but it's not where those other dots are. So I mentioned before that there's these two things that are happening. The first is we're building better and better quantum hardware and software. That's moving up and to the right, those dots, between 2025 and 2028. And then that big jump for large-scale fault-tolerant, which is the 2029 dot, and then where we think we'll be in 2033. So clearly by 2029, we're in the spot of you can run the Blackboard proven algorithms and know that it's better. We believe that there'll be heuristic methods that people will come up with to take advantage of in that white space, but we can't prove it to you until we prove it to you, and that's what quantum advantage is about, and that's why this is a subtle argument. Okay, so let's get a little bit, take a step back. We have been making real quantum computers, sci-fi come to life, available for people to run programs on since 2016. Back in 2016, there were 5-qubit systems. You could simulate it in a circa 1980 PC, any program you could possibly run on that system. We're now to the point where we've got a fleet of all 100+ qubit systems that you can't, as I mentioned before, I won't kill that horse again. You can't run that program on the world's largest supercomputer. We've chosen to make it cloud native service. So basically, you write your program, you call an API, you send your program, you get your results back. Why are we doing this? Why are we selling hardware, blah, 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 blah. This technology is evolving very rapidly. We have put over 80 systems on the cloud since we started. We've got about between 10 and 15 of them live for our clients at any given time. You can do the math. That's like basically a refresh rate of a little bit. It's about 18 months. We're completely refreshing our hardware. Our software stack gets refreshed like every month. We could not do that with a classic sell you a server, maintain it. We just couldn't do it. So that's the primary reason. The second reason is just easier to program and easier to interact with. It's a loosely coupled service. You basically can integrate it into your workflow very easily. All right. What does it kind of look like in terms of a bigger picture? I'm not going to go into this detail because I don't have time. But you can think about there's 3 basic pieces of a quantum computer. You got the thing that holds your qubits. This is where you're holding your quantum state. This is where it's 1,000 times colder than outer space. This is where it can't interact with anything else in the universe. It's like the sci-fi part of it. It's basically where you're doing your quantum computation. You actually program those things by singing to them with microwaves. So you need a set of control electronics that sing to your qubits and basically sing to it again when you want to read them out, translates it back into zeros and ones, and sends it back. And then you need the equivalent of kind of like the CPU for your computer, the thing that's basically doing the classical control, doing the pre-processing, post-processing kind of stuff. So you've got basically a set of servers. Put all that stuff together, you've got your quantum computer or your quantum system. That quantum system, from our perspective, then integrates into the rest of the world of classical computing, which are equally important. Because quantum computers do not sit alone. Shor's algorithm, the most famous algorithm out there, there's 3 parts of that algorithm. Only 1 part of it runs on a quantum computer. The other 2 parts are classical. Any workflow we can possibly come up with is going to be a mix. So you basically need to think of, you run your quantum subroutine on your quantum computer, you run your classical subroutines on your classical computers. Okay. I'm going to go faster here. We offer basically that runtime service, lots of different plans, lots of different ways you can access it. We have deployed it not just in our data centers. We've got a cloud center in Germany. We've got a cloud center in Poughkeepsie, New York. We've also deployed them dedicated for one client in a bunch of different places in Japan, in Canada, in South Korea, very soon in Spain, and we announced we're going to do it in India next year. Okay, so what are the 3 steps we need to do to get from where we are today to the future? Keep delivering better hardware and software, a clear path to fault-tolerant quantum computers, and then an ecosystem of people doing the algorithm work and the application research. All right, so Qiskit is the phosphor stack that we built on, open source foundation. I'm not going to go into the details here. You can catch me if you have any questions about programming from a software perspective. Again, I'm not going to go into the details here on the hardware side. Current state of the art, 156 qubits. This is our current fleet of systems. I'm not going to talk about this because Nighthawk is our next generation processor later this year. basically better connectivity. With better connectivity, you can basically run the same program with less instructions, so it gets more efficient. That's the next step, end of this year. Then basically what we have done is we've put out a very, very, very detailed roadmap, which honestly makes me nervous, because we basically told the entire world exactly what we're doing between now and 2033. We're not telling them exactly how to do it, but we're kind of telling them exactly how we're going to do it. So this is basically the roadmap of stuff when it's going to get released to the external world for external users to read. The one thing I'll call out on this chart is you see our processes are on the bottom. They like birds, we like birds, I don't, but anyway, so they're named after birds. The number in the parentheses, the 5K, is roughly gives you an order of magnitude of how complex a program you can run. The big jump between Nighthawk in 2028 and Starling in 2029, where it goes from 15,000 to 100 million, that is the jump to fault tolerance, right? Okay, so how do you get that jump to fault tolerance? To make it practical, you need to have very efficient error-correcting codes. Probably, if you have been paying attention to quantum, like about 5 years ago, basically people were talking about building like warehouses in order to basically build like one quantum fault-tolerant system. That's because the overhead from an error-correcting code for the original surface codes were a very large number of physical qubits to make one logical qubit. We came up with a couple years ago a much more efficient code, which is about 10x more efficient than the surface code, which allows us to basically build these quantum memories that use about 244 to 488 qubits to build 12 logical qubits. So it's still like a fairly big overhead. It's like a 24x-ish kind of overhead. But compared to a 1000x kind of overhead, it's much, much more capable. I'm not going to go into the details. There are other pieces of this. This is also something that is very, very complex. When you hear people hyping stuff, there are multiple things you need to prove in order to build a real fault-tolerant architecture. You need the error code, you need the decoding, you need a logical processing unit in order to put instructions into that quantum memory, and you need a magic state factory, and I'm not going to explain that, in order to basically have non-Clifford gates to have a universal set. So you put all that stuff together. What we have basically come up with is a modular approach where we can build 400 qubit modules and then be able to stitch those together to build these large-scale fault-tolerant systems that aren't going to be like the size of this room. They're going to be the size of maybe a quarter of this room. Okay, in order to do that, just to give you a feel for like why is it taking you 3 years to go from, you've already know exactly what you're doing, why is it going to take you 3 years? There's still engineering work we need to do. To give you a feel for that, on the left side here is what a 2D representation of those sea of qubits look like today and the connectivity between them. It's not quite this simple. There's multi-level packaging, et cetera, et cetera. But the connection map between those qubits is what looks on the left. In order to build that gross code, we need longer distance connectivity in order to basically make a torus out of that 2D mapping. So that's what it looks like on the right. Very complex packaging in order to do that. A lot of engineering work to get the yield up and to get the still high quality qubits. That's why it's taking us a couple years. But when we do that, we have basically said we're going to build Starling by 2029, which is going to look like this. Just to give you a feel, because I really haven't shown you many pictures, which is my fault. But this is what the fault-tolerant system in 2029 is going to look like. This is what a state-of-the-art system today looks like. So you can see basically the difference is that this is basically one, I'm going to call it a fridge in the middle with the control electronic wings to the side. In order to build the fault-tolerant system, we need to basically take 6 of these and connect them together in a modular way, right? And to do that, basically, this is our Poughkeepsie site. The system 2's on the right of this chart. 2 of them are already there. in this particular location. 2029, we're building out the Sterling in that site, and then just to give you a feel, the 2033 system, it looks like that. Right? So these are becoming, this is real. Like this is real, this is engineering. Decades of research behind this, but this is now engineering. Okay, second part of this. 30 seconds. Second part of this is you need to build an ecosystem. Critically important to build an ecosystem to build the algorithms. We need to do this together with industry. We need to do this with startups. And thank you very much.